It goes without saying, at least for a card game anime, that every protagonist deck also follows the edgy deck to pair along for the season, and unfortunately I am a sucker for those kinds. In DivineZ, it is the fated 1-0 Blangdmire. I honestly can't tell what dragged me and others into being stuck with this deck for a while. Maybe it was the turn 4 TK potential as an ultimatum for your opponent to play around? Was it the amount of free draws and power? Was it the high roll potential and healthy filtering? Was it Zamu getting a crit out of nowhere? Well, to take a deeper look, let's look for a few cards. Set 2, where it all started, had the Ride Line, Zamug, Alchemist, Colossus, and Arwim. No, we're not talking about Mindhacker. Holoraptor and Vacant Fang share a very similar skill. When ruled upon by their respective cards, you reveal top 3, and sold in every card that is grade 1 or greater. If you sold in 2 or more, you draw a card. The difference being Raptor bot decking while Fang shuffling. It's a huge double-edged Ride Line with being very aggressive with filtering your deck and building a toolbox from your soul in the get-go, and there are some unfortunate situations you can find yourself in, whether you soul in PGs or Persona rides, or even whiffing the top 3 to just not get the soul and draw off. However, there can be huge avenues for high roll, especially during Vacant Fang, if you were to soul in, say, Colossus, which can also draw, and we'll come back to that. Let's look at Blangdmire. For his first skill cost, allows you to bind 2 or more up to 4 cards from your soul face down, and you may, very important, you may draw a card. If you bound 4, your opponent has to choose 2 rears and bind them face down. While Blangdmire gains power for every 2 face-down cards in your bind zone, this skill just does a lot. Bind being one of the best forms of removal in Standard that forces your opponent to either play around or maximizing the value, else you get punished. Blang has also scaling that eventually does get out of control and asks for PGs, and with the optional draw and other cards that also draw, your hand size can actually get quite big. Remember when I said you may draw? This deck will cycle fast, with deck out being a very big issue for the deck. Having this option can widen your approaches in the late game options if, in the worst case scenario, you got really lucky off Ride Line and maybe greeted too much of Zamug's filter. As for Blangdmire's Divine skill, during the guard step of the battle this unit attacked, if you have 8 or more face down cards, you can give Blangdmire a crit, and if you do, your opponent cannot call or play Sentinels from their hand until the end of turn. Oh, this can also, like, nullify your opponent's and unit's abilities until the end of turn, so... This skill really scared people in reveals. In an already shieldless format where perfect guards including Sanctitude can be a make or break in correct guarding. Being stripped of this option paired with Blangdmire scaling asks your opponent, have you been guarding early enough, or have you been preparing for this turn good enough to survive? Otherwise, you could just check like double heal and move away from lethal range and say, yeah, fuck you. The Divine skill is a massive skill check where if a person does not respect the matchup, especially when there are other annoyances to account for, you can easily just get punished and explode to Blangdmire. Arguably it's also a skill check for the Blangdmire player, whether they can assess whether to shotgun the skill or leave it to the next turn. Doing it too early can cause you to lose out on plenty of gas, and doing it too late might end up letting them farm too much shield, or they've gotten to the point where they can just kill you before you can Divine skill. If you're on the opposing side playing against Blangdmire, you better been holding on to that Persona ride. Assuming you've lived a burst turn, if you don't end up accounting for this part of the skill, your Vanguard is stuck with being vanilla 1 drive, even with being a grade 3. Speaking of which, as for the other annoyances, you have Steam Raider Zamug. A grade 2 that's first skill lets you top 3, put any number of cards into soul, and if you put 1 or more into your soul, you may draw a card. Zamug being able to aggressively filter, and also fixing the soul needed for Blangdmire's skill, especially if you do end up like breaking the Ride Line skills, can also fetch your pieces you'll need, and draw 1 to refund the commit. Pair this with Cage, and you're basically playing Pale Mood again. Zamug's second skill when this unit attacks, Energy Blast 3, so as long as your critical is 1 or less, Zamug gets plus 5k and 1 crit. Which is just the freest thing ever brings up in the card. The main downside of Zamug is that getting the card's full value is when you have a Blangdmire on board. Alongside, this is one of the cards you just don't want your opponent to swing into, unless if you have another copy in hand, because of how stupidly free the second skill is. Arguably, if you really wanted to make an early commit, you would just slap down Valkyria or Butcher or whatever. Next is Evoke Alchemist, a 13k booster if you have a Blangdmire Vanguard, and when Alchemist boosts Blangdmire, it gets plus 2k, and if your bind zone has 4 more cards, Counterblast 1, reset a front or rear guard, and if you have 8 or more, that unit gets plus 15k. It's just adding more into the kill potential of the Divine skill turn, by introducing a 4th attack to rip 1 extra card from your opponent's hand, and the power gain to make things even harder to guard. Say you have an Alchemist giving 15k to Zamug, boosted by a 13k, which can make up to 53k with a crit, restricting PGs. And that's only assuming Persona Ride and no triggers. Or even resetting a Valkyria that souls in a grade 3 that can go up to as high as 63k. Colossus, able to casually gain 10k if you have 4 more cards in your bind, then a mandatory soul in, which also triggers its second skill. If this card is put into soul for your ability, you can bind it face down and draw. Basically, if having 2 Colossuses, you're able to pump an extra 5k for Blangdmire's swing, remove itself from board when it's necessary in certain matchups, and able to feed soul if you're bricked. And if you soul it in from cards like Samug's top free or Falcratia's drop in soul in, you can also trigger a second skill and gain free draws off that. Arwim, starting off with an on-play soul charge, changes to top 2 soul in any amount, and if you did not put 2 or more, shuffle a deck. The second bit is that if Blangdmire's critical was increased by his divine skill, you can retire him, draw a card, and your opponent has a ditch if they want to ride or stride for a turn. Arwim procs Colossus, helps 6 soul, and introduces his really annoying red tax, but it does have a few problems of itself. One is that the card is a mandatory draw in a deck that already struggles with deck out, and has a timing that is only exclusive to Divine Skill turn, pretty much just a second Divine Skill. Locking them out of riding and striding can be nice, but there are some exceptions, as for like some decks that do not care if they lose their stride skill, and some person can just hold their persona, draw for turn, ditch top deck, and then with Vanguard skill just shit out a board or something. Usually by the time you're using Arwim, you've definitely screwed over your Divine Skill turn and are already in a tough spot. But the card is still nice to play as a one-of. Netherworld Butcher also came in pretty early as promo support for Blangdmire, which is basically just a Falcate slash early Falcratia to help fix soul. But it also has an anti-intercept, which is very interesting, usually in the application to deny shield value and punish commits when Blangdmire binds the board. Alternatively, you can ignore this part and have Butcher be as an early commit to rip cards early. But mainly it didn't fix the issue of the deck just running out of gas past the Divine Skill turn. Vaderock Dragon with an on-play soul charge, then CB1 calls something from soul, and if you have a Blangdmire Vanguard, it stays on the board, else it gets put back. Secondly, it gets 10k for every 4 cards in your bind zone. Since pre-set 4, Blangdmire was the only one who actually scaled. Past the Divine Skill turn, it was really just a PG target that you just needed to account for. With Vaderock, however, the power scaling helped push that ultimatum and have genuine threats past the Divine Skill turn. Vaderock is also able to call something from soul, so you have ways to toolbox without using Cage. Oh, by the way, the scaling is also continuous too. From a multi-tweet, not the first time this had consequences, you can use the boost set order package to give Vaderock's boost and make them 30k boosters. Since you lock out PGs for a turn, having to guard a Vaderock boosting a Zamug with a critical restood by an Alchemist is pretty big. There's also Surga to help fetch your set orders, your persona rides, other pieces, etc., while also being a free soul charge. The only real issue is that she costs CB in a deck that's already CBing so much with Zamug, Vaderock, Alchemist, and it can be a bit rough with navigating where to allocate your CB usage since your only real countercharge is actually just healing. Other cards to consider are Folklores as early commits that convert into draws, Angel Ladder to mostly fix soul and for the matchups that have constant removal, and sometimes Lamina if you just don't believe that you're gonna brick as opposed to using Tiskar. And also for the another call from soul. Keep in mind that the builds have mostly shifted into the booster package, which you can argue has more chances to go wrong as opposed to older builds because of the piece reliance, but usually the payoff is really nice. With the new support introducing more opportunities for the turn 4 OTK, having more avenues to play past the Divine Skill turn, Blangdmire still ends up being a huge threat for a good handful of matchups in Set 4. Now with this information, go be a local terrorist or something. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. Special thanks to all our channel members, you all do help my card game addiction. Until then, I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.
Definitely not, bruh.